Hello all of my history-loving friends. Welcome back to the world of Madam Morbid. This is a history channel where I talk about any number of historical topics which often have a darker aspect to them. If you like what you see here today, please like this video and please subscribe to my channel for more stuff like this. Today we are doing part 2 of the life of Pearl White, a huge movie star in the 19-teens era of movie making. Movies were in their infancy. She did a lot of stunt work. She was one of those women that was tied to the railroad tracks. Our last episode was all about her childhood in Green Ridge, Missouri. When we left off, she had just gotten onto the train to move with her family to Springfield. I am here at the former site of the Springfield depot. Pearl and her family would have gotten off the train right here. Pearl had 2 cages full of canaries that she was in charge of during this move. They had a house all lined up, and Pearl said it was a really nice one. It was a large house. Now, her father's new wife came into the marriage with some money, and when they first got married for a few years, they actually had enough to eat. Her money is probably one of the reasons they were able to move when they did. I told you last time they were moving because her dad and her stepmom had a baby, and that baby died very young, and her stepmother just could not stand to live in the house where her baby died. Her father had some business opportunity waiting for him here in Springfield. Exactly what it was, I really don't know, and Pearl didn't seem to know either. She thought maybe it had something to do with real estate, but from the get-go, it did not work out. Those first 3 months, they only had housing because the 3 months rent on this house had already been paid up front. Pretty much the family was living on the little money her brother was making delivering newspapers. After that 3 months was up, they moved to another house that wasn't nearly as nice. It was much smaller. They had no furniture at all. Her stepmother was very ashamed of the fact that they had nothing. She wouldn't let anybody visit the house. She never invited anybody over. The children were not allowed to have playmates over because her stepmom did not want anyone to see how terrible the conditions in their house was, how there was no furniture. It was just empty. She said it took 4 years after her father found a steady job to finally get a full set of furniture for that house. Pearl's job in the family was to chop wood for the family. She said of all of the houses they lived in Springfield, and there were many of them, I would say 7 or 8 according to the directories. So they were moving all of the time, but she said the one building she was most familiar with for all of these houses was the woodshed, because every morning she got up and she chopped however much wood the family needed for that day. She also, in each of these houses, set up a trapeze in every single woodshed, and she would practice that all the time, getting pretty good at doing trapeze work. Over the summers, she said she always had a job outside, picking berries or whatever job she could find to do. At one point, she said she was working on a farm picking berries, and that she would walk 7 miles to go pick these berries. She claims she was barefoot and that she had to walk the 7 miles home. I tend to doubt this story. When would she have time to work? If you're walking 14 miles a day, you're spending all of your time walking. That sounds a little bit like your grandparents telling you they walked to school in the snow, uphill both ways kind of stories. I'm sure maybe she walked a mile or 2, but surely not 7. Over Christmases, she and her sister worked as shop girls during that holiday season. I'm going to drive over and show you the high school they went to. At most, Pearl would have gone there maybe 2 years. In the early 1900s, this was Springfield High School. Now it is Central High School, and it is significantly larger than it was when Pearl would have gone here. She dropped out when she was about 16 years old to focus on acting and to start traveling. Pearl was working really hard on her trapeze work in the woodsheds. She always had 50 cents on hand just in case the circus came into town. Anytime they came, she went. One of the circus people, it was a lady named DeVere, she took a liking to Pearl, and she started showing her tricks on the trapeze. And she realized that Pearl was pretty gifted at this, and she started working with her. And one summer, she offered, the train's going by, see if I can get the train in the background. One summer, she offered for Pearl to tour with the circus. Now, at first, her father was really not on board with this. I mean, if theater people are weird, then the circus people have really got to be weird. But Pearl absolutely loved her time with the circus, and she was able to convince her father, mostly because the $8 a week she would get would be 2/3 of it would go back to her family. So they traveled from city to city, and she absolutely loved circus life and the circus people she was working with. Unfortunately, her circus career was cut very short by an injury. She was hanging from the trapeze by her right hand when something, ligaments or something in her wrist, tore. And as soon as that happened, of course, she let go and she fell. She broke her collarbone. I think she might have broken some ribs. And that was pretty much it. When she was writing Just Me in 1919, she said the injury from that fall and from whatever she had done to her wrist still hurt all of those years later. She had no choice but to return to Springfield, and this is when she really decides to try to get involved with the theater. And that's what brings me to where I'm standing right now. On this spot, in this empty area right here, was the Deemer Theater. It was a stock company. It was held in a building owned by Dr. Deemer. He basically was a snake oil salesman, it sounds like. He had this elixir that he touted as being able to cure everything. The way she got involved with this theater, Pearl had gotten a job with a printing company. She said she sat from, what was it, 8 a.m. to 6 in the evening, feeding paper into these printing presses. That printing company had a deal with Dr. Deemer. And the printing company would make the labels for his bottles. Pearl tried again and again to apply to work specifically for the theater for Dr. Deemer making these for his bottles. She said she had to apply multiple times before she was finally chosen and placed at the theater working for the doctor. She then weaseled her way into printing the programs for their plays. And eventually she worked her way up into bit parts, and as time went on, those parts got bigger, and eventually she became a part of the company. Now, her dad wasn't really very fond of this because to him, theater people are immoral. You shouldn't be interacting with these people. But as he got to know them, as he got to meet them, they're just people who happen to be good at pretending to be somebody else. But for some reason, Pearl got tired of being a part of this company. I think Dr. Deemer might have been having some financial difficulties. Within a year or two of her leaving, everything folded. The one incident that really did her in with wanting to perform anymore for Deemers, it was in the middle of a performance. The show was the Count of Monte Cristo, and she was playing a male character who was in a sword fight with Monte Cristo, the main character. She said they put a button on the end of their swords, I'm picturing something like a foil like you would use for fencing. During this fight, she said for some reason she had her mouth open. She doesn't know why or how it really even happened, but for some reason, the actor playing Monte Cristo stuck that sword into her open mouth, and she instinctively closed it. And as he ripped the sword out of her mouth, it tore a big chunk of flesh off the roof of her mouth. And she said she was just enraged, and part of it may have just been reflex. She said she just started punching the actor playing Monte Cristo. She was so angry. They had to jump on her and pull her off. For whatever reason, I don't know if there were other reasons, but that was kind of it for her. She didn't want to do this anymore. Around this time, she's about 16, maybe 17 years old. She made all of her own costumes and all of the clothes she wore on a daily basis. She was a really good seamstress too, and I'm sure that came in really handy for the theater as well. To end this episode, I'm here in Doling Park. Pearl performed here too. I don't know if she did it with the Deemer Company or if it was something separate she did every now and then. The theater was on the right where this parking lot is now. Doling became a theme park around the turn of the century, and its heyday was in that 1907 period to 1929. A small amusement park did hold on into the 1960s when it began to become less popular. This skating rink, there was one here when Pearl was here, but this is not the building because it burned in the late 1920s, and this building replaced it in the 1930s. But after her humiliation during that Count of Monte Cristo performance, Pearl contacted a former Deemer player who had formed his own company called the All-Star Stock Company. Pearl performed under the name Maisie Hall, an ode to the man who gave her her first break in Green Ridge. What they did, they would perform for a week in every town, and they traveled all around. She asked him for a job, and he said, "Sure, anytime, you're welcome." She claims that she did terrible at her printing job, so they would fire her. I guess she knew her father would never let her willingly quit. But when she told him that she could make $15 a week performing for this company, he said sure. $15 a week was a lot of money back then. She took her first train ride alone to Memphis. She said she was a terrible dancer. She had an okay singing voice, but nothing super special. It seems maybe their performances weren't fabulous. She had this costume she had made herself. It was a very patriotic number. It was made of the fluffy tulle, red, white, and blue, and she covered that with red, white, and blue ribbons so that when she would kick her legs up, it would just be this really fluffy skirt underneath. And she made the joke that, well, people couldn't abuse her or boo her if she was wearing something patriotic because that would just be wrong. In Natchez, Mississippi, she said she was dancing and she was having a good time, but evidently she just wasn't very good at dancing because she said all of a sudden something landed on the stage. She didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, but she just kept going. She kept dancing, and then something else hit, and she stepped on it and slipped and fell onto her butt in the middle of the stage. And she said they were throwing rotten eggs at her. They'd been saving them up throughout the week, I guess. She said that was the end of her dancing career. In Charleston, South Carolina, they got stranded. Basically, they disbanded. It was not going well. She had saved up $60, which seemed like a lot of money to her at the time. And she said everywhere they went, she would stay at either a boarding house or a private home. She would rent a room. And she was renting from a man who ran some sort of shipping company, or he had a ship. I don't know if he was the captain, but he offered her a job as a stewardess. And he said, you can be a stewardess on my ship and I'll get you to Cuba. There's a lot of Americans performing in Cuba. So she did that, and she went to Cuba and she performed for a little while. And her major complaint there was that the men were really inappropriate with women. She says she was followed, and she had never really had men pay that much attention to her until that. So she left there and she went to South America And she said the men there were better, but again, these were very short trips into another country, and she just made enough money to get herself back to Springfield. And that brought her right back here to the train depot. Pearl says her family lived about a mile or a mile and a half from the train station. She walked home. They had not heard from her for months while she was overseas and were out of their mind with worry. Her father basically told her, okay, that is it. No more theater. He mapped out the rest of her life, what she should do. He said, well, you should be a dressmaker. She is 17 at this point, and she said she was just waiting for that 18th birthday when she could make her own decisions. He first got her a job as a dressmaker's apprentice. She was making $4 a week. She was also helping this person clean their home. She was there 4 months, and she said she hated it. She was miserable, and eventually she got fired. She didn't want to be a dressmaker. Then her father got her a job as a nursemaid for 3 children in a wealthy family that he knew. Hated it. She said she was terrible at it. She didn't want to do this. She started looking in a theatrical newspaper called the New York Clipper, looking for acting jobs that were available. And she said she was able to find a position through a Kansas City agency with a troupe in Galena, Kansas. She waited to tell her father until the day she turned 18. Dad, I'm going to be an actor. I've gotten this job and I'm leaving, and I'm 18 now and I can do whatever I want. And she said her dad was just kind of resigned. Well, okay, I lost. I can't stop you. And she said even her stepmother was very tender with her for the first time. She gave her a big hug and told her that even though their home was very humble, that if things don't work out, you always have a home to come back to. And I'm going to end this episode with her getting on the train and leaving home to seek out stardom.